When the Varn Dominion arrived in Earth's orbit, they came not as diplomats or explorers, but as conquerors. They had subjugated a dozen worlds before ours, turning their inhabitants into laborers, pets, or worse. Humanity, to them, was just another primitive species waiting to be tamed. They broadcast their demands on every channel, in every language, making it clear, surrender or be wiped from existence. Their ships, vast and ominous, hovered over every major city, their weapons charged and ready. At first, the world government scrambled to negotiate, to find a peaceful solution. But the Varn had no interest in diplomacy. When Earth hesitated, they made an example of New Delhi, reducing it to smoldering rubble with a single energy blast. Millions died in an instant. The message was clear: obey or perish. The Varn had seen resistance before. On other worlds, rebellions lasted days, perhaps weeks, before being crushed beneath their superior firepower. They assumed Earth would be no different. They were wrong. At first, humans responded with conventional warfare: jets, missiles, and coordinated strikes. But the Varn swatted them away like insects. Their shields held firm, their counterattacks devastating entire battalions. The death toll climbed with every hour. Then, something changed. The Varn noticed something strange. The humans didn't break. They didn't scatter in fear like the other species had. In fact, with every act of brutality, the humans grew more resolved, more ruthless. It wasn't just their military that fought. It was everyone. Civilians crafted makeshift weapons. Hackers infiltrated alien systems. Scientists in hidden labs worked day and night to reverse engineer stolen alien tech. Every man, woman, and child found a way to resist. The Varn saw their cities burn, but they didn't see despair. They saw rage. And then the real horror began. Captured Varn soldiers were not taken as prisoners in the traditional sense. No, the humans had something far worse in mind. They dissected them, studied them. Within days, Earth's leading biologists cracked the secret of their physiology, exploiting weaknesses even the Varn themselves weren't aware of. Reports began pouring in from occupied zones. Varn warriors, fearless in battle, started disappearing in the night. When their bodies were found, they had been butchered with terrifying precision. Some had been skinned alive. Others left hanging from ruined buildings as a warning. The Varn had underestimated humanity's ability to learn, to adapt. Worse, they had overlooked the most terrifying thing about our species. We are not bound by rules of war. On the 4th week of the invasion, the first Varn warship crashed into the Atlantic. It wasn't taken down by missiles or high-tech weaponry. It was hacked, its own systems turned against it by human ingenuity. Within days, more ships fell. The humans had cracked their codes, their networks. The Varn, for the first time in their history, felt fear. They sent reinforcements, doubling their forces, thinking sheer numbers would crush the resistance. It didn't. Instead, the humans grew bolder, more creative, more savage. They sent diplomats, hoping to negotiate a surrender on humanity's terms. But the humans didn't want peace anymore. They wanted vengeance, and they were just getting started. The Varn High Command, arrogant and overconfident, had assumed that humanity would crumble under the weight of superior firepower. They had no concept of the depths of human rage, of our ability to hold a grudge, to turn pain into purpose. By the 6th week of the invasion, the Varn were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. Their warships, once mighty symbols of conquest, became tombs in the sky. Earth's engineers, working with salvaged alien technology, devised viruses that infected Varn systems, forcing their own ships to fire upon each other. Their weapons, once so devastating, were now unreliable, turning off at random, overheating, or worse, exploding in their own hands. But it was the ground war where the true horror unfolded. Human guerrilla fighters struck without warning. They knew their own terrain, moved like ghosts in the ruins of cities, used everything at their disposal: urban warfare, psychological tactics, biological weapons. The Varn had expected direct confrontations, traditional battles. What they got instead were ambushes, assassinations, and traps so cruel they made even their hardened warriors hesitate. Entire platoons of Varn soldiers would enter a building, only for the exits to be rigged with explosives. Others found themselves funneled into narrow corridors where waiting humans tore through them with scavenged plasma rifles. Some were lured into seemingly abandoned areas, only to be attacked by rabid dogs infected with alien diseases, courtesy of human scientists who had no ethical boundaries left to consider. Captured Varn officers were subjected to the same brutality they had inflicted on others. They were dissected, experimented on, their weaknesses broadcasted to every remaining resistance cell. Humans discovered that the Varn had an acute sensitivity to certain sound frequencies. Within days, speakers blared high-pitched sonic attacks across battlefields, forcing the aliens to collapse in agony before being executed. And the worst part? The humans enjoyed it. Varn prisoners spoke of the way their captors smiled as they worked, the way they relished every scream, every broken bone. This was no longer a fight for survival. It was a massacre in the making. The Varn, once the masters of terror, now found themselves drowning in it. Their forces were dwindling. Their reinforcements hesitated, reluctant to deploy to a planet where soldiers were vanishing without a trace. The Empire, vast as it was, had never seen such resistance, never faced an enemy so willing to drag them into the abyss. And then, on the 9th week, the unthinkable happened. The Varn retreated. Not because they had lost too many troops, though their casualties were staggering. Not because their weapons had failed them, though their technology had been turned against them. No, they retreated because they had finally understood the truth. Humanity was not fighting for survival. We were fighting for revenge. The Varn High Command made the call, abandoning Earth and ordering all remaining forces to flee. But humanity wasn't done, not by a long shot. We had captured their ships, we had cracked their codes, and we had learned one very important lesson. We weren't just defending ourselves. We were coming for them. As the last of the Varn warships broke orbit, humanity did not cheer. There were no grand celebrations, no triumphant speeches. There was only cold, silent rage, the kind that burns slow, deep, and never truly fades. The world was in ruins. Cities had been reduced to craters. Entire nations had been shattered. Millions were dead. Families erased. But humanity had endured. And now we had something we never had before. A reason to go to war beyond our own planet. Earth's brightest minds, scientists, engineers, tacticians, began working tirelessly, reverse engineering what little remained of the Varn technology. Within weeks, human scientists had developed their own versions of energy-based weaponry. Within months, they had begun outfitting their own warships. The world had changed. Governments had fallen. New alliances had risen in their place. It was no longer about countries or borders. Humanity had been forged into something new, unified by vengeance, bonded by blood. And we were no longer content to wait. The first human fleet, an armada of salvaged Varn ships and newly constructed human warcraft, launched a year after the invasion. It was not a mission of exploration. It was not a diplomatic voyage. It was an act of war. Our scouts found them first. A Varn colony world, bustling with activity. A planet that had never known war, never seen the devastation its people had unleashed upon others. The humans watched from orbit, studying the Varn civilians going about their daily lives, utterly unaware of what was coming. some of the human commanders hesitated. These were not soldiers, not the ones who had raised our cities, but the decision had already been made long before the fleet had left Earth. The Varn had shown us no mercy. We would return the favor. The first strike was swift and merciless. Human ships descended upon the colony like avenging wraiths, bombarding their cities, cutting off their escape routes. Buildings collapsed in fire and ash. Varn civilians, unarmed and defenseless, fled in terror, just as humans once had. And then the ground troops landed. They moved through the ruins like phantoms, executing every Varn in sight. No distinction was made between soldier or civilian, young or old. Humanity had no interest in fairness. Some of the Varn begged for mercy. The humans laughed. There was no surrender. No prisoners, no diplomacy. By the time the last of the human warships left orbit, the planet was little more than scorched rock, a graveyard, a warning. And it was only the beginning. The Varn Dominion had built an empire on conquest and subjugation. They had never known fear, never understood the true cost of war. But now, for the first time in their long and arrogant history, they were afraid. And humanity was just getting started. The Varn High Command received word of the colony's destruction in stunned silence. They had underestimated humanity once before, and it had cost them dearly. But this was something else. The humans were supposed to be a broken species, licking their wounds, grateful to have survived. Instead, they had done the unthinkable. They had retaliated. And they had done it with a level of cruelty and efficiency that sent a chill through the ranks of the Varn leadership. The Varn had always been the predators, the conquerors. Every species they had ever encountered had either surrendered or been exterminated. But humanity had changed the game. They weren't fighting for survival anymore. They were hunting, and they were learning. The next human attack came swiftly. Another Varn colony, reduced to ashes. Entire cities wiped out overnight. The humans were moving fast, striking with precision, adapting to Varn defenses with terrifying speed. They didn't just kill, they studied. Each battle was a lesson, each skirmish a chance to perfect their tactics. And the worst part? The Varn couldn't stop them. Human ships were smaller but faster. Their soldiers were outnumbered, but fought with a savagery the Varn had never seen. The humans did not fight to win battles. They fought to annihilate. Soon, it was no longer just colonies falling. Varn outposts, supply lines, even military strongholds began vanishing from their star maps. Some were obliterated in orbital bombardments. Others were infiltrated and turned against their own kind. Entire battalions of Varn soldiers disappeared overnight, their bodies never found. The ones who did return came back different. They spoke of shadows moving through the ruins, unseen killers who struck without warning. They whispered of human war cries in the dark, of screams echoing through their comms before falling silent. Some raved about being watched, about the feeling of something lurking just beyond sight, waiting to strike. The Varn had thought humanity was primitive, but humans had mastered something far worse than technology. They had mastered fear. The Varn homeworld, once the heart of a mighty empire, was now a place of paranoia and dread. Every high-ranking official knew what was coming. The question wasn't if humanity would strike the core worlds. It was when. For the first time in Varn history, they considered surrender. The war had spiraled beyond their control. The humans weren't just winning. They were dismantling everything the Varn had built, piece by piece. And then the final message came. A single human transmission, broadcasted across every Varn channel. No threats, no demands, just 6 words. "We are coming. You started this." Panic erupted. The Varn government fractured. Some demanded a last stand, an all-out war against humanity. Others whispered about fleeing, about abandoning their empire and seeking refuge in the uncharted void. But deep down, they all knew the truth. There was nowhere to hide. Because humans don't just fight wars, they end them. The final days of the Varn dominion were not marked by glorious last stands or heroic resistance. There was no honor in their defeat, only terror, only inevitability. The humans did not launch a grand offensive toward the Varn homeworld. They did not send a fleet to blockade their space. No, that would have been too predictable, too merciful. Instead, they let fear do the work for them. One by one, Varn systems went dark. Entire planets fell silent overnight, their populations wiped out without a single distress signal sent. The few survivors who managed to escape spoke of horrors beyond comprehension. They spoke of human ships appearing from nowhere, striking with brutal efficiency before vanishing again. They spoke of power grids shutting down, life support systems failing, ships self-destructing before their crews could react. The Varn, once a proud and mighty race, were being hunted like animals. And then the assassinations began. Varn leaders were not just killed. They were made into examples. The High Warlord of the Dominion was found impaled on the spires of his own palace, his body skinned, the words, "Remember New Delhi," carved into his chest. The Minister of War was discovered in his private bunker, suffocated by an unknown gas that had melted his lungs from the inside. On the walls, written in his own blood, was a simple phrase, "No surrender, no mercy." One by one, the ruling elite fell. Some tried to flee, abandoning their people, hoping to disappear into the far reaches of the galaxy. But there was no escape. Human operatives tracked them down, no matter where they ran, and made sure they suffered before the end. By the time the first human fleet arrived in orbit around the Varn homeworld, there was no need for battle. The planet had already fallen. The cities were in chaos, the streets filled with rioting and despair. Entire military divisions had deserted, knowing there was no point in fighting an enemy that had already won. The humans didn't even need to fire a shot. They simply landed, and the Varn surrendered. But humanity was not interested in surrender. There would be no peace treaties, no integration, no second chances. The Varn had shown no mercy when they came to Earth. They had slaughtered millions without hesitation, without remorse. And humanity had learned. They gathered what remained of the Varn leadership in the ruins of their great capital city. They forced them to kneel before the remnants of their once mighty empire. And then, one by one, they were executed. Not quickly, not mercifully, but slowly, deliberately. By the time the last body fell, the message was clear. Humanity had not just won. They had erased the Varn from history. The empire was gone. The species, once feared across the stars, was no more, and the galaxy would never forget the lesson they had learned. You do not provoke humanity, because if you do, we will not stop. We will not forgive. And we will never, ever forget. With the Varn dominion shattered, its people exterminated, and its homeworld reduced to a graveyard, humanity stood at the precipice of something greater than vengeance. We had won. But now, we had a choice to make. For the first time in history, humanity was no longer bound to a single world. We had conquered the stars, not as explorers, not as diplomats, but as predators. The other alien species, once subjects of the Varn dominion, now looked upon us with a fear they had once reserved for their former masters. Some reached out in hopes of forming alliances, offering peace and friendship. Others abandoned their colonies entirely, terrified that they would be next. And humanity? We did not respond. We had tasted war, and we were not ready to let go. The first true human empire was forged in the ruins of the Varn. It was not built on ideals of freedom or unity, but on power, strength. The simple, undeniable truth that we had become something far worse than the Varn had ever been. We did not rule with diplomacy. We ruled through fear. We did not ask for territories. We took them. We did not offer treaties. We offered ultimatums. Those who knelt were allowed to live, their civilizations spared under the condition that they swore absolute loyalty to the new order. Those who hesitated, even for a moment, were wiped out as effortlessly as the Varn had been. The galaxy trembled as the human war machine continued its relentless march. What had begun as vengeance had become something else entirely. A hunger, a purpose. The other species watched in horror as humanity reshaped the stars in its image. Former Varn slave worlds were repopulated, not by their original inhabitants, but by human colonists, eager to claim new lands, new resources. Cities were rebuilt with human architecture. Factories churned out warships by the thousands, and fleets expanded, no longer just for war, but for conquest. There were no rebellions. There was no resistance. The galaxy understood now. The humans were not just another empire. They were something far worse. A species that had learned not just how to win wars, but how to ensure they never needed to fight them again. Because who would dare challenge the monsters that had destroyed the Varn? Who would stand against the species that had rewritten the rules of war, that had turned survival into a weapon? No one. And so humanity continued its march, leaving only silence in its wake. Decades passed. The Varn were a distant memory, their homeworld a silent monument to what happens when you cross humanity. Their once feared empire had become nothing more than whispers in the dark, stories told to children of other species, warnings of the monsters that lurked among the stars. But humanity did not stop. We had turned war into an art, conquest into an instinct. We had evolved past the need for mercy, past the need for hesitation. The galaxy had given us a reason to fight, and in doing so, it had forged something unstoppable. There were no challengers left. The great empires that had once thrived in the shadows of the Varn either bowed or burned. Those who surrendered were allowed to keep their names, their cultures, their illusions of independence. But they answered to Earth now. Those who resisted no longer existed. Entire species vanished, their planets wiped clean and repurposed for human expansion. Not because we hated them, not because we needed their worlds, but because we could. Because humanity had learned a simple truth. War is the only language the universe understands, and we had become its most fluent speakers. The once fractured nations of Earth had long since faded, replaced by a single unified force, the human dominion. It was not ruled by politicians or idealists, but by warriors. By those who had bled on the battlefields of Earth and beyond, who had survived the fires of the Varn War and emerged unbreakable. Peace was no longer an ideal. It was an illusion we did not entertain. The galaxy did not resist because it knew better. Every planet, every system, every empire that had once stood apart was now just another piece of humanity's domain. There were no more enemies left to fight, no more threats lurking in the void. We had won. And yet, humanity was restless. War was in our blood now, a part of us as intrinsic as breath. The absence of battle left a void, an emptiness we could not fill with politics or civilization. We had conquered the galaxy, and now we looked outward, beyond the mapped stars, beyond the known universe, because we were not done. There was still more to take, more to fight, more to break. The universe had made a mistake when it provoked humanity, and now it belonged to us.